So I'll know when this is on when. Just get the comments up. I'll know when this is on when. Good morning. This is the 15th of the Dr. Obitashaka shows. The topic for this show is a follow-up on the show before last, which was dealing with January 6th and the Capitol insurrection. The topic for this show is how Blacks led the defeat of Trump, January 6th, and the Black agenda. Let me repeat that. How Blacks led the defeat of Trump, January 6th, and the Black agenda. So this show is going to focus on a victory that was led by Blacks. And we often, as I pointed out, our greatest weakness as a people is we underestimate our own strengths. And many of us now are drawing conclusions about this is just another election in that probably our demands will be put to the bottom as usual. And the Ignornet is full of information on Kamala Harris not being Black and a whole bunch of other stuff. But you scored a great victory. It was a coalition. You didn't do it by yourself, but you led it. You were the principal organizer of it, and your power was most central in determining the outcome. And I'm going to show you how this worked, but more important, while this show will be about looking at the victory and the role that we played in the victory, as well as other forces, this show is also going to be focusing on what happened on January 6th and a lot more of what that means and how is that connected to the Trump defeat. And it's going to be focused on, well, so we've had this defeat. What are we going to, of Trump, what are we going to do with it? And so there'll be some focus on demands that a number of groups around the country are making, Black organizations, key Black organizations, to the Biden administration. And also be some discussion on what we need to be doing as a continuation of work to revitalize and strengthen African-American families, communities, organizations, and what kind of programs can we begin to launch. Now, this show will not primarily focus on that. I'll have a series of shows that continue to focus on that, including interviewing some of the leaders of some of the key movements that have produced this change. So it's very important to acknowledge this victory, getting rid of Trump, at least as president. But it's also very important to understand, how did we do it? Some of the viewers have a pretty good idea, some have a little, and probably whatever I have to say, there'll be other things that people want to add to it. But it's very important to understand what was the basis of the strengths that Africans in the United States draw from that really determined this outcome. And in this particular set of campaigns, what were some of the strategies and tactics, programs, and organizations that produced this victory? Because this is extremely important. And also, given the role we played, say, in the election of Obama, what are some of the mistakes we made there that we don't want to make again? And I would just kick it off by saying the biggest one was to think that once Obama was elected, that was the great achievement, and we could go back home and let him do his number. That was a big mistake. Obama knew that he did not really want motion in the ocean or a movement, and his movement was really the only active thing going at that time that got him elected. And he put his movement in the DNC, Democratic National Committee, with his campaign manager up there. And that was to keep his base quiet, because he wanted to move without the pressure against him. And of course, he was coming in the very beginning of a financial crisis, the 2008 economic crisis. But the fact is that for the 8 years of Obama's presidency, there was not a movement putting pressure on him. Whereas with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he came into office and he was undergoing or facing a depression, the most serious economic collapse in United States history, there was an active movement in the streets. It was largely left-wing, labor, communists, and others, but they were putting demands on him. And those demands got a lot of things like Social Security, unemployment insurance, and a host of other things. So, and a tax on the rich, over 90%. So that was the pressure put on him that got results. Some of us didn't put pressure on Obama, Blacks especially, because we were overly sensitive to the issue of racism that we call white supremacy. You don't see me using it too much because white power is in decline in the world. I will use it in reference to the groups that particularly took part in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, because that's how they define themselves. That's not how I see them. But the assumption by Blacks was that Obama would be constrained due to racism, and we shouldn't do anything to endanger his political position. That was a mistake. Obama had both the House and the Senate. He was in a stronger position than Biden is, and that he had a 60-vote majority in the Senate. Biden has a 1-vote majority, and he had the House. And what that means is when you have that kind of power, you can do almost what you want, especially when the economy is collapsed, as it did in 2008. He literally had the corporations, some of which had financed his campaign, in the palm of his hands. And he had the choice to go strong or go weak. And in his rescue package, he chose to go weak. 740 some odd billion over 2 years, a third of which went to tax cuts that went into the pockets of the rich, when it should have been at least 2 trillion. His economic advisors now say it. I was saying it then. And that would have provided money to help not only banks and hedge funds, but poor people, Black people. We lost 40% of our wealth in the 2008 financial crisis because we received nothing, and the masses of poor people and working people in this country received virtually nothing. The rich got richer. So we are now looking at a historic win against a president who was driving us into what I call viricide, a genocide through a virus, COVID-19, and who, because he faced a crisis, he had been running a presidency on automatic pilot, watching TV, eating hamburgers, watching Fox News, sending out tweets, and firing whoever he wanted to. But the state of ship was on automatic pilot, like an airplane where the pilot's gone to sleep. So the real hope was that a crisis would never happen. And unfortunately, it did, COVID-19. It's probably good in one way in that it guaranteed, with some good organizing, that Trump would be out. But it definitely wasn't good. It has created now over 400,000 deaths, whereas in the world, many countries, particularly Asian countries, have faced very few. It has shut down the economy. It has hurt Black and brown people more than any other group. And a lot of people have died, and a lot more, even though you now have an administration that's going to address this, will die before this administration can get its policies in place. So we need to learn from the Obama administration that just because we have a victory, don't go to sleep on it. We're going to have to put major pressure on this administration while we also do our own work in terms of organizing in our families and in our communities and working with African people, people of color, and others in this country and around the world to improve the conditions of our people and ultimately to promote real liberation. So the three-pronged topic of this discussion, the defeat of Trump, what happened on January the 6th, which I did an initial coverage of on a couple of weeks ago, and the Black agenda, these are all connected. Because we defeated Trump, we have January 6th. And this was the white grievance campaign of what I described a couple of weeks ago as their feeling of dispossession. The masses of whites feel that since the defeats that they suffered at the hands of the Black freedom movement in the 50s and 60s, and then with the rising number of people of color coming into this country through immigration, and now the electoral defeat of Trump, we have this myth that Trump has created that the election was stolen from him, and his call to try and correct this by going to court, which failed, trying to pressure attorney generals, Pennsylvania and Georgia and other places, to reverse the vote count, and a host of other pressures. When these failed, including, I suspect, some review by him of how he could use the military to possibly shut things down and call for some kind of national emergency. It's not proven that he, was thinking that, but I think it's fairly clear that if he could have got away with it, he would have. So his last resort was January 6th. And that was a try and stop the count of the Electoral College, something that was completely impossible to do. So these three topics are connected. The defeat of Trump produces January 6th. And while the media is focusing on the fringe groups that have been pushing conspiracy theories. The main thing is there is a general sentiment among the majority in the Republican Party, over 80%, that the election was stolen from Donald Trump, when in fact this is a case of making the criminal the victim and the victim the criminal. Because in this case, Donald Trump did everything he could to steal the election. He tried to repeat what I cover in my post-Reconstruction DVD or show on lessons from post-Reconstruction for voting Trump out of the White House into the jailhouse, which is going to happen. He tried to repeat the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. He hoped for a close enough election that he could throw it into the House or the Supreme Court. And he had 3 Supreme Court justices that he hoped would vote in his favor. And of course, then he would be pulling out of the Bush playbook in 2000, where he took an election from Al Gore by the Supreme Court ruling in his behalf without any precedent and without any really legal basis. So he hoped for that. And that didn't work because we outsmarted him. We outorganized him. And so that led to January 6th, and the real grievance of the whites who gathered there was a grievance that they've been dispossessed of the absolute power to run this country, dispossessed of being able to dominate this country numerically, as their numbers are going into decline. And they will soon be replaced by a black, brown, red, and yellow, a majority. And this vote is a forerunner of what is going to be happening a few years from now permanently. And then the dispossession of their white president, Donald Trump. So these three things come together. Now, to look at how they come together, a key thing in looking at this election and what produced the victory for Biden is to first of all look at what is the basis for Black power in this country. And the first thing to look at is the strategic basis for Black power, both Black electoral power and Black mass movement power. And they both derive from the same thing. And very often, one leads to the other. I mean, if you look at the Black freedom movements of the 60s, those movements from the streets produced the right to vote, restoring what had been provided in the victory in the Civil War and Reconstruction. But it was the electoral vote that was gained through mass action, through grassroots action. So these two are not separate. One drives the other. And in fact, as I pointed out in some of the previous shows, the mass movements in Mississippi and across the southern states had as its primary objective the achievement of the Black vote, because it's the masses of Black people in the South and the North saw the vote as a key weapon to be used to empower Black people politically. And we saw how other factors worked to promote that. Self-defense provided a basis of protection for that. So when we look at the strategic power of Blacks in this country, we need to understand, in the case of looking at the strategic voting power, it's inseparable from the strategic mass political power expressed in mass movements. And so what is the basis of this strategic power? I covered some of this in the show on post-Reconstruction, lessons from post-Reconstruction. And we saw that, for example, the strategic military power of Blacks during the Civil War was based on the fact that whites were divided. They were engaged in a civil war, and 170,000 Black soldiers decided the outcome. We were the balance of military power. And without us, that war would not have been won. I think that's safe to say, based on the fact that the North had very few victories prior to Blacks being involved in the war militarily, and began to win most of the battles after, once Blacks came under arms. Now, there were other factors to winning. The North changed generals. Grant proved to be a better general than a lot of the other generals. But Blacks brought in the fighting force. So this is telling you, when whites are divided, and they almost always are, and this is something that we don't get because we underestimate our power. We're always operating on the assumption, when we use the term white supremacy, all whites are in league together. That's not the case. And in this particular case, this country was divided north and south. And so Blacks determined that outcome. The same with Reconstruction. The gains that were made during Reconstruction, where Blacks gained the right to vote, that came again through political division between whites and Blacks over the economy and over the politics of this country. And because the South wanted to win the war politically that they had lost militarily, and they wanted to carry out a number of policies to do that, Blacks were empowered to vote, mainly to see that that couldn't happen. Again, it was in the case of division where we gained the right to vote, and a number of Blacks serving in legislatures and whatnot. So sometimes this strategic power comes when there's a division of whites, and very often that is part of it. The strategic power of Blacks also derives from, and principally derives from, this: we are the largest, most oppressed group in this country, and next to Native Americans are on the bottom. Native Americans are on the very bottom, but next to them, we are. And so when we move, we literally shake the whole system. And so this is a part of the strategic power of Blacks. As we move, particularly, we affect the movement of oppressed people in this country and around the world. So that's part of the strategic power of Blacks. Part of the strategic power of Blacks is that our position in this country enables us that when we move, we're able to create chain reactions. And these chain reactions mean that as we move, we cause others to move. And as we move in this country, we cause global change in the world. And that's a part of our strategic position. And so in the case of the Garvey movement influenced subsequent movements for African independence on the African continent. But the Garvey movement also influenced the movement for liberation in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh, who had been the leader of the Vietnamese movement later, gained his inspiration by going to a Garvey movement. That movement inspired him to go back to Vietnam and lead a movement of resistance against the French, then the Japanese, and then the Americans. The Black movement coming out of the United States created a chain reaction that encouraged one of the foremost leaders of a liberation movement in Asia to stand up against the French. And that's according to Ho Chi Minh. In slavery, Black people came up with this idea of one Africa. And it was under the guise of philosophy coming out of a biblical statement in the Bible called Ethiopianism, that princes shall come out of Egypt, Ethiopia shall stretch forth its hand unto God. In 1900, this becomes Pan-Africanism, or the idea of one Africa. Ethiopianism was based on the idea that Ethiopia had maintained its freedom during a period of colonialism in Africa. It was the one African nation that was free and independent, and that inspired Africans all over the world to believe that if Ethiopia could be free, someday the rest of Africa and Africans around the world could be. And in 1900, there was a conference held in London, held by a man named Sylvester Williams, who came from Trinidad, a lawyer, in which W.B. Du Bois participated. And this was the first time that we heard the word Pan-African, meaning all African or one African. One African people globally, one Africa united and free. This idea of Pan-Africanism, it gets popular. And in 1945, you have a meeting of Africans in London, in Manchester. And I had the honor to address one of the anniversaries of this conference in 2005 in Manchester, because I chaired the political committee of the Sixth Pan-African Congress in Tanzania in 1974, the largest gathering of African people under the banner of Pan-Africanism. So at this conference, W.B. Du Bois was the honorary chair. George Padmore, whose real name was Malcolm Nurse, who came from Trinidad, was the principal organizer with Kwame Nkrumah, who became the head of Ghana in the 50s. He was serving as his apprentice and his helpmate, and they launched this conference, the Sixth Pan-African Congress, and this was the launching of the movement of African independence, because out of this conference comes the motive force for African independence. Now there's motive force on the ground, but Nkrumah goes back to Ghana and leads the Ghanaian movement for independence. And then we see subsequent movements emerging around the world. So Pan-Africanism created a chain reaction. And Garvey also was a part of that spirit. So African people in this country are strategically located. When we move, because of the way we move, we encourage others to move. Now, the other thing that's key to this election victory in 2020 of Biden is the role that African-American culture played in this election. All movements for Black folks in this country, whether they're electoral movements, whether they're grassroots movements, are expressions of culture. And they are being guided by certain beliefs and certain principles. And those principles are what enable us to organize our own people and unify them, and then at the same time to reach out to other groups. And it is really the basis for our power, provided that we use the correct strategies and correct tactics. And so African-American culture was a driving force behind the power, the strategies, the tactics, and the very decisions that Black people made across this country to defeat Trump. What were some of these principles in African-American culture? I would say the most important principle was the principle of freedom. Africans in this country have created a culture that is freedom-based. And our notion of freedom is very different from the notion of freedom of our oppressor. The oppressor defines freedom as his ability to do whatever he wants when he has power. That is the principle of arbitrary freedom, meaning that they have power, they will do what they want to do. That's their principle. And that's because of the nature of European culture. By the way, this principle does not come out of the doctrine of white supremacy. This principle comes out of their philosophy and worldview that most of us have not bothered to study. So that's their idea. Whoever has the power does what they want to do. This COVID-19 situation is proof of that. They've done what they wanted to do, which is virtually nothing, especially because they had a fool at the helm. And everything that's wrong in the system has come up. Blacks were already having a shorter life expectancy than whites. But when COVID comes along, then that life expectancy is hit in a different way. Lives are hit by either not being given medical care or bad medical care, and so forth and so on. So this system we live under is arbitrary and racist and got a number of other things. But African American movements, whether they're electoral or grassroots, are driven by a different idea of freedom. And that idea of freedom is that you can't have freedom without both discipline, which is then the basis for freedom. Discipline, without discipline, there's no freedom. And this drives throughout our culture. And this is at the base of the special feature of African American culture, which is creative, improvisational, and innovative. And we often think of improvisation as coming up with something out of nothing. That's not true. Even the great innovators who come up with new sounds, whether it's in music or new principles of science, as George Washington Carver and others have, they are discovering what's already there. They have simply piped into something higher, and that's called innovation. But creativity is at our heart and soul. So when you go up against us, you're going up against a creative people, and freedom is at the heart of creativity. So no freedom without discipline. In fact, discipline is freedom. Whether you're an artist, whether you're an organizer, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent. And we know about parenting, there's some discipline involved, you know? And so freedom isn't just free. As Frederick Douglass said, there's a price for freedom. And the price for freedom is struggle. And so the driving force in both the mass movements that we put forward, and in this case, the electoral movement that defeated Trump, is creativity, discipline, and freedom, which is based on the principle of spontaneous organization. African American culture is contradictory. European culture is based on absolutes, good or bad, right or wrong, you know? Ours is good is bad, you know? And in our culture, spontaneity, that is drawn from your soul, is a basis for organization. A good musical group comes up with something out of their soul, but then organizes it. Discipline and freedom. Our movements work that way. And we're so good at that, we can't predict what we're going to do. But the key thing is the pursuit of creativity is for freedom. And the ultimate goal of freedom is that a human being be able to express their creative personality. What we were put here for, our gifts. The ultimate goal for freedom for white people is power over everything, to oppress. And so this was a driving force behind the movements that we have put together, including the ones that burst out last summer and the electoral movements that drove it as well. And in this particular case, the first freedom we wanted was from Trump. We wanted him out because he was on the verge of installing fascism in this country. And a narcissistic, psychopathic, racist personality who thought that he could do whatever he wanted to do and was getting away with doing a whole lot. And in the case of COVID-19, which was nothing, which is leading to the deaths of an unnecessary amount of people. So the movement both for the vote against Trump, but the movements that preceded, not only last summer, but long before that, the driving force in our culture that drives these movements is the drive for freedom. And freedom is the impulse that is our expression of creativity. And that was the yearning of enslaved Blacks, that they be free so they could create. And in the midnight of slavery, they created a new African culture and art form. And this is one of the deepest parts of it. And at rest, this idea of spontaneous organization and discipline and freedom rest on fundamental principles of African philosophy, which I'm not going into now. I'm simply saying this is one heavy, deep culture. And it is this deep culture that guided our people in their organizing, guided leaders, guided the grassroots, and everything else. So that this is crucial. So this was a movement that was an expression of culture. Another key feature of this movement was and is humanism. We often talk about how slavery dehumanized us. And I pointed this out before. No, slavery was a savage system. The people that operated it, the slave masters, and those whites, the majority of people in this country who supported it, identified with it, served as slave patrollers, or worked in factories that drove their profits from the slave system, they were the ones that were dehumanized. And while we were scarred by slavery, we came out of enslavement with our humanity intact. And humanism is at the core of how we move as a people. We don't like wrong. We don't like injustice. We don't like oppression. And when the grassroots finds a way to win, they'll strike out. The grassroots is smart. They don't move unless there's an opportunity. But when they get an opportunity, they move smart. And when they pick people as spokespeople, these people prove to be pretty good. Whether you're talking about a Marcus Garvey or a Malcolm X or a Martin Luther King or Harriet Tubman or a Nat Turner, they are mouthpieces of the will of this culture. So this is key. So before we get into the details of what's going on now, you need to understand this background, because we like to dismiss this. We often don't appreciate our strengths and where our power comes from. Now, it was clear to the grassroots, it was clear to Black leadership that Trump was going to do everything to steal this election. And if we weren't careful, we'd be back in the 1876 position. And so it was clear the only way you were going to win was with an overwhelming vote. That was how Obama won. But for that, he would have never got his first term, let alone a second term. And so leadership understood this, the grassroots understood this, because we're smart. The key thing to this is, in acknowledging this victory, we need to recognize, and I think most of us know this, without the Black Lives Matter movement that swept this country in 2020, 50 cities, 50 countries. Some demonstrations abroad were larger than some here. Without that momentum, without that movement, and without the principles that it stood on, along with without COVID-19, Trump would still be in office because he proved that he could mobilize a larger base of his white support this time than he had before. This time with money, before without very much. And so the overriding drive in the Black Lives Matter movement was around, again, the issue of culture, humanism. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and a host of others murdered by the police. What Black Lives Matter, which is a acronym for the best organized of these sectors, what all these networks did, because it was much more than Black Lives Matter, what they succeeded in doing, starting with Black Lives Matter, is frame an issue. And that issue has been like the issue for the hip hop generation and for our people. In the 60s, the movement of King was based on a Bull Connor strategy. His best movements worked when he had an evil enemy. And so that evil enemy was personified in the head of police in Birmingham, Alabama, named Bull Connor, who could be counted on to sick his dogs against women and children. And that garnered sympathy for the movement and got him a civil rights bill. Black Lives Matter and the other affiliates have chosen to use the march as a method to rally against police violence. But by focusing on the police have become the Bull Connor for this generation and for our people. And it's not one that any organization controls, because when the George Floyd thing kicked off, it wasn't Black Lives Matter that kicked it off. It wasn't any network that kicked it off. It was the rage of our people. It was a rage of a whole lot of people in this country to see a Black man, which is going on all the time, to see a Black man with a white policeman with his knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. A big old 6'4", nice brother, George Floyd, to have his life kneed out of him at a time where people are locked up under COVID restrictions and everything else. It led to mass outrage. But that was the outrage of not only our people and others in this country against police oppression, but against oppression in general. This piled up. It was all kinds of issues that people were feeling. The deaths due to COVID, the hell that we constantly face in our communities, the poverty that exists in this country, the unequal distribution of wealth, racism built into every part of this society, so that this unleashed a mass force. And again, because our power is strategic, when we move, we get others to move. And in this case, the fundamental issue here was humanism. A human being being treated like nothing, which has been the common practice of this country. And so that rallied a whole sectors of people, white youth, some older whites, Asians, Latinos, every grouping you could think of, largely young, but crossing all sectors. And it forced this country to put as a top issue systemic racism, which, by the way, Biden now has to at least couch his programs under. You see Biden, when he makes his statements on the programs he's implementing, his first reference is to George Floyd and how the knee on the neck was symbolic of the oppression arising from systemic racism, white supremacy, as he called it. It's been hard for just about any president to even talk about this. Johnson talked about we shall overcome when he passed his voting rights bill. Biden is literally talking language that's coming from the base that put him in office. It's going to be up to us to put the force on him to get as much through as we can that will address the issues of our people. And I want to stress the issues of the poorest among us. That's the most important thing to be concerned about. But the key point is that it was the strategic power of this Black-led mass movement that shifted debate. And it put systemic racism on the top of the agenda. And if you look at the polls that came out after that, whites who were saying that, oh, the police weren't that much of a problem, that racism wasn't that much of a problem, opinions began to shift. And while Trump would then come and unleash the Proud Boys and unleash the Boogaloo Boys and others, and then try and take advantage of anything that wasn't peaceful and nonviolent, and to characterize this movement as violent, basically that movement had put him in a corner, combined with COVID, that it revealed his incompetence. Now, it didn't reveal his incompetence to his base. His base was willing to see deaths come as long as more Blacks and Browns were dying. Though as the summer moves on and we go into the fall and the winter, now the red states are dying. But still, they stick to Trump. And I'm not surprised. He's the white president. I provided an analysis for why he holds, and if he stays out of jail or gets out of jail before the next election, I'll bet he'll be running again. But the key point is he got outflanked. And he got outflanked by the way in which the movement defined the issues of human rights, of human life, being more important than anything else. And humanism, central principle of our culture. I've said this before. African people globally could lose 90% of our humanism and we will not, we'd still have more than most humans other than Native Americans. Humanism is at the core of what we're about. A culture that talked, coming out of ancient Kemet, speak truth, do truth. This is a culture of humanism. And the most humanistic group of Blacks in this country are Southern Blacks. They're the ones closest to Africa. You could say also the most brainwashed because they're still in contact with this slave mentality that we all have to work on. But the fact is the kindest Black folks tend to be Southern Blacks, you know. But the point is, it was this Black Lives Matter movement that gave the impetus to this motion that would drown Trump. Without it, I don't think that would have happened. Because the key thing was, in this election, you had to bring out the youth. And the youth have been at the heart and soul of this movement. I've talked about it before. We're going to have leaders of Black Lives Matter on later and other organizations who will talk about their strategies and tactics in this whole campaign. So Black Lives Matter and other networks that were organizing around the country at a time in which extended family communities have been weakened, at a time in which two-parent households had been weakened. At that time, young Black people and young people have proved to be very expert at using this new technology, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all these others. And by drawing from the page, which I've referred to before, of the playbook of the 60s, the Ella Baker playbook of group-centered leadership, it made it very difficult for the system to really see where this was coming from. And this is the kind of leadership you'd have to have now, because both in a time of institution breakdown, family breakdown, church breakdown, community breakdown, there ain't going to be any single organization going to have the power to pull anything together. But also at a time in which the issues we're facing are so complex. They're the issues of race, but they're also the issues of economics, the issues of violence, a host of others. And so it would take a large cross-section of leadership to address this. And I know this has driven a lot in the power elite, the white power elite, out of their mind. Where is this coming from? You know, how do we get this under control? So this was key to the victory against Trump, but this is key to our people's forward movement. And this movement has to continue. This movement, and I might say that while police are the issue that have served to anger people and arouse people, I personally think, and this is just my opinion, that movements like Black Lives Matter need to connect these issues up with economic issues and others. And I think that they are. You know, when we get to the demands that's being made on Biden and stuff, some of that is coming out. But I think programmatically in our communities as well, and other programmatic issues have to be linked to this issue of the police. And they are to an extent already, by demanding cuts in police budgets and putting those in social programs and other demands that we'll get into in a minute. So that's key. Now, let's look at the electoral victory, because this is extremely important, because it reveals something about Black power, not just electorally. And the first thing I want to do is an overall view of the power from which the Black vote stems. And this is extremely important. And the overriding agenda, as we know in this case, was getting rid of Trump. The first thing is about the victory is this. Understand this, and the topic of this show is the leadership that Blacks played in the Biden victory and the defeat of Trump, the leading role. We're not claiming that we did this alone, but it was a leading role. The first thing to appreciate about this vote, but it's also true of the movements that we have put forward, is the Black vote, of all the votes in this campaign to get rid of Trump, was the most unified. It was more unified than any other group, white, Asian, Latino. The only group that may have equaled us is Native American. They did not do the count on Native American votes around the country. We know from Arizona that 99% of the Navajo Nation voted against Trump, 99%. It's just that their numbers are small, but they're conscious. They know who their enemy is, and they're our natural ally, whether you realize it or not. For those of you who think allies aren't important, you're living in America, baby, and you're living in the world. Allies are important. The movement I led, San Francisco Freedom Movement, we led it, but we had allies. They're important. You just make sure you lead it when you're in any kind of alliance or coalition. So the first thing to get straight is that the Black vote was, of all the votes, the most unified. The largest percentage of Blacks voted one way. Other votes split in different directions more, and that weakened them. And that's especially true of the white vote. And this is something we often underestimate about white people. They're rarely unified on anything, even though, yes, most believe that they're superior to Blacks. But when it comes to program and how they execute stuff, it is very hard for them to all stay on the same page, or 80 or 90% of them. The second thing about the Black vote, one that I've already stressed, is that this was the most unified vote because it was an expression of Black culture. And I want to stress the key factor in Black culture that gives us the greatest unity, and that's race consciousness. I hear some of our scholars talk about Blacks don't understand racism. And I guess they have a point if they're talking about sophisticated racism, how it works inside the economy, structural racism, how it's structured into every phase of the society. So all of us may not know all the details of that, but we generally have a culture wired around race and racism and race consciousness. We're the most race conscious people on the planet. And when we make decisions, that is the glue that brings everything else together. Now, that isn't the heart and soul of our culture. This drive for freedom, that's African based, but it comes out of oppression. But its definition is African based. Humanism, a whole bunch of other things. Those are African principles. So if all we were race conscious, we'd be race conscious, but probably not much different from European Americans. But the key thing is race consciousness is the glue. And when Blacks make decisions, mass decisions, we make them as a unified group. It's hard to get us unified, but when we do, that is the key. Without race consciousness, no Garvey movement. Without race consciousness, no Montgomery bus boycott. Without race consciousness, no 175,000 Black men with Winchester rifles aimed at their enemies in the Civil War. And always this race consciousness, when the group moves on it, it's right, meaning it's something that's right. The group is smart about that, but the culture is wired for truth and what's right. So this is real key. This really is what's behind not only Black Vote, Black Lives Matter movement, and a host of others. And by the way, race consciousness doesn't mean racism. Race consciousness makes us special. That is, the mass of Blacks, who I call social nationalists, political nationalists, cultural nationalists, I go into a whole bunch of things. By and large, this is one of the few nationalisms, or nationalism means seeing yourself as a nation. In this case, we may not be conscious that we're a nation, but we move culturally pretty much the same. We marry, though marriage rates, the percentage of Blacks who are married is down, marriage rates among Blacks is high. I call that social nationalism, and so forth. But the key thing is our nationalism is not based on hate. We have issues of self-hatred that we have to deal with. But the humanism is really key to us. So culture is really behind the unified power of both Black Lives Matter movement, which could also reach out to other groups, wasn't exclusive, and the Black Vote to put Trump out of the White House into the jailhouse. Now, the other thing is the Black Vote coming up under African American or New African culture reflects collective Black interests. When Blacks move as a group, we move according to interests. I'll give a couple of examples. One is we moved Republican because that was the party that emancipated us. That was a collective decision. Say whatever you want about the Democrats in office. It was the overall direction that Blacks as a group were looking at. They were looking at the fact that it was in our interest to see that slavery stay in the ground. When we shifted to the Democratic Party, which had been the party of the Klan under Roosevelt, we did it because the social and economic programs of the Roosevelt administration were beneficial, even though many of them didn't benefit us in the beginning. We eventually gained benefits from those, and our vote shifted according to collective interests. We didn't shift like white people did just because Blacks had moved a certain way, they moved another. Like if you move in a neighborhood, they move out. So the Republican Party has become the white party because Blacks got in the Democratic Party. We'll make a collective move for the right reason. Theirs was for the reason of superiority, thinking that they couldn't be in a party with inferior blacks, who, by the way, had secured some power. They only wanted blacks next to them if they were cooking their food or shining their shoes. So this is real key. Now, the exception always proves the rule. The media is focused on the percentage of blacks who voted for Trump. He got about 3% more black vote, 3% or 4% more Asian and Latino vote. But in the case of the black vote, this is what they focus on. The exception always proves the rule. We're always going to have some little Waynes out there. You know what I mean? But the little Waynes don't represent us. Now, of course, Lil Wayne feels like he made the right decision. Trump gave him a get out the jail card. You know what I mean? But he ain't looking at the interests of his people. But the majority of our people say, hell to Lil Wayne. You know, 50 Cent had to back off of that $500,000 that Trump was giving everybody from the hip hop community that endorsed him. He said so. That was the price. And then he said, all money ain't good money. This is a former drug dealer. No, it wasn't that the money wasn't good. It was that the humiliation that he was facing from black people, especially black women, but black people, was too hard for him to stand. I mean, he's not going to be able to put on a show like Power, which is itself about gangsterism, well put out, but still gangsterism, if he doesn't have some respect in the black community. So the exception proves the rule. The black vote complemented the black mass movement. They were not separate. One grew out of the other. One complemented the other. One was key to the other. And what you found is this black vote was also key in terms of shifting the balance of power in key states. The black vote determined who the Democratic Party picked as its candidate for president. It wasn't that it played a role, it picked them. Now, the Democratic Party was right alongside that because Biden had won no primaries up to South Carolina. Biden had no money. The rich weren't backing him. And in fact, Obama was discouraging him from running. In fact, at one point in the primary campaign, Obama encouraged all of the old candidates to drop out. Now, the main reason was to get Bernie Sanders out, but he had also not been one to endorse Biden either. So Biden is saved by South Carolina, but it is then that the Democratic Party establishment rallies behind Biden and gets all the other candidates to drop out and endorse him so that they have a unified candidate. They don't have a situation that Trump faced the Republican Party with in 2016 and a divided field with him having a solid base. So, but blacks were still key in that. Without that South Carolina win, probably no Biden as presidential candidate running against Trump. And then this key role of black women in both Black Lives Matter and in the registering blacks to vote and general electoral politics dictated that he not only was going to have a black VP, but he's going to have to be a black woman. And so we have all the debate of who is Kamala Harris, all the rest of that stuff. The key point is that choice was again dictated by the power that blacks brought to bear in this campaign. And I know a little bit more about Kamala Harris than most people do. I'm not going into that now. But you know, the key point is it was, again, black voting power and black mass movement power that led to that. What this also indicates is the black grassroots, as were other sectors in this campaign, brown, red, yellow, and some whites, they were interested in having a candidate that could win. It would have been better had a Bernie Sanders been picked. It would have been better if someone who had some credentials around caring for the people, around economic justice issues, around healthcare issues, national healthcare issues, around opposing white supremacy, which was Bernie Sanders' real weakness. He never had a coherent message on race, though he tried to come up with one, particularly in the midst of his 2016 campaign and then in this 2020 campaign. He was never able really to latch on to a Black base. He did start to build one among Latinos, something that the Democratic Party virtually ignored until the election campaign. They lost Florida largely because they ignored Latinos. They had a convention, Democratic convention, where not a single prominent Latino was asked to speak, which was beyond stupid. But again, that was the Democratic Party's approach to put its main focus on rallying the white vote. In fact, Biden was picked because he thought, and some of the Democratic Party thought, that he could win back working class whites who had supported Trump. That was a fool's errand. Trump kept his whole base and brought in 4 or 5 million more whites. And so Biden's win did not come from that route. But still, Blacks in South Carolina is the Bible Belt. James Smalls, on a show with him, and he was making this point that the Bible Belt starts in the South in South Carolina. James Smalls from South Carolina. And when Blacks in South Carolina make a decision, and that's a large number of Blacks, other Blacks tend to follow. And if you don't recall, and some of you may, that's also where Obama ended up after winning a white primary. He is then down in South Carolina. So that was key. So the masses of Blacks are thinking collectively, not just their leaders. And they're looking at who can win. And they're looking at this guy's got to go. So the other thing about the Black vote is Black people are good at forging alliances and coalitions. And so Blacks, throughout this campaign, both the Black Lives Matter campaign and the electoral campaign have been doing what we've been doing for a long time, understanding how to hook up with other groups. And so in a lot of key states where you saw victories, those victories had to do with networks organizing. In Georgia, 189,000 Black people stripped of the vote. But then you have sisters, particularly creating networks that register over 1 million votes. And that's true in different areas. And this is true for Latinos in Arizona and Native Americans. Latinos in Arizona had earmarked a racist sheriff who had been parading Latinos through the streets in chains around immigration violations, and had voted him out of office, and it had a strong voter registration campaign for a number of years, as did Native Americans. So there was a grassroots effort going on in different parts of the country. And in the case of Blacks and Latinos, some Native Americans and some Asians, there were some hookups in some places. Now, the key thing is the Black grassroots was real smart. When Trump started to take voting boxes, mailboxes, and cart them off, when he started to take the machines for counting votes and disassembling them and all the rest of this stuff, while there was a major outcry against that, it eventually had to slow down, but it did have an effect on the delivery of the mail. Black people got smart and they began to adopt a lot of different strategies. Their leaders and the grassroots decided that they would vote by mail, while Trump foolishly tells his people not to. This was a stupid move on his part because a lot of Republican votes come through mail-in voting. Blacks saw that just as in 1876, you had voting polls and everything else shut down. So Blacks decided to come out in numbers. And so what did they do? They brought their folding chairs and sat for 9 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, in the rain, in the sunshine. So they matched them both at the polls, but in the early voting as well. So the grassroots knew how to counter stuff. And the most important thing is the vote, just like Black Lives Matter, was guided by progressive principles. And I think what you can safely say is the most progressive voters in this campaign to vote Trump out of the White House were Black voters. Black females, the most progressive, and then Black males. And that's based on voting patterns. But that means that, again, expressing the heart and soul of their culture, they stood on principles. We stood on principles. And that was really key to what we accomplished. So now let's just look at this voting thing that went down and see what that meant in terms of outcomes. I made the point that the Black vote was the most unified vote. And among people of color, it was the largest. And that made a big difference. And so if we look at the percentages of people of color and whites that voted, note that 87% of Blacks voted for Biden. Now we know there was a male-female split. It was about 3 or 4% more sisters voted for Biden than brothers did, but the overall thing was 87%. And that was the highest percentage of any group that was counted. Native Americans didn't get counted. And so we don't know what the exact percentage of the overall Native American vote was, but it was high. 66% of Latinos voted for Biden. Normally, it's been 70%. So Trump cut in 4% into the Latino vote. 63% of Asians voted for Biden. Again, normally it's 70%. In the case of whites, 37% of whites voted for Biden. And we know that for Trump, 58% of white men voted for Trump, and 55% of white women voted for Trump. But the key point is 37% of whites voting for Biden, that is, and 58% overall voting for Trump. It's showing you that while the Republican Party is the white party, they haven't got all the whites. And this is a key thing to point out, because particularly as the demographics shift and the percentage of whites and the numbers of whites that vote go down because their numbers are going down, they're not reproducing themselves in the numbers of Latinos, Blacks, Native Americans, Asians are going up, then it means that that divide works even more against them. Now, here's the key number to really get straight. In terms of the overall Latino vote, the overall Latino vote doubled in this election. This is real key. Trump has woken up a brown giant. All that coming down the stairway and saying that the Mexicans are coming, they're rapists, they're robbers, but a few of them are good. All of the detentions and separations of children from their parents, all of that has come to hit him hard. And so the Latino vote doubles. And so what does this mean? The overall Latino vote was 20 million. 20 million. But because only 66% voted for Biden, that broke down to 13,200,000 Latinos who voted for Biden. That's a large number, but had their percentage been larger, then that number would have been larger. But that's important in comparison, comparing the Black vote. The total Black vote was 19 million compared to 20 million Latino. Because 87% of Blacks voted for Biden, as opposed to 66% of Latinos, then it translated into a larger number of Black votes. 16,530,000 Blacks voted for Biden, whereas it was 13,200,000 Latinos voted for Biden. So even though the Latinos had 1 million more votes than Blacks, because we stand as a unified force, produced a larger number. So just in terms of numbers, this was important. But in terms of overall outcomes, this made a big difference. Now, the question is for Blacks, we're always voting for Democrats, and then what do we get after the campaign is over? This is going to be the real key question for us, with a mass movement hanging over Biden's head, both behind him and in front of him. But before getting to that, I want to look then at the January 6, 2021 Capitol insurrection and some things that we know about it now, and what was really behind it, and what it means for the future. And I don't think any of us fully know what it means for the future. What I would say overall is that what you saw with this Capitol Hill January 6, 2021 Capitol insurrection is a coalition brought together by Trump that he has been feeding for his 4 years, that allowed the largest assembly of the right wing, and especially participating within it, the armed militias. And so the thousands that attended to come up under this false cry of fight the steal, gave particularly the hardcore within this a base, at least to move within, particularly during this demonstration, but after as well. None of these militias had the capacity to draw the numbers that Trump put out there. How many was thousands? I don't know the exact number, but this was significant. And this portends an ongoing thing. It's a question of how these groups collaborate. And this idea of the steal was all directed at states and cities where Blacks voted. So they wanted the votes of Blacks discounted. And of course, the assumption of the right wing is that Blacks could not have done this on their own. It had to be a conspiracy out there directing us. And the radical right wing, that conspiracy would be Jews and other whites. We don't have enough sense to do this ourselves. Big mistake in war is to underestimate your enemy. And that's how Trump got beat to begin with. So I would say that the overall thing about January 6, 2021, is that this was a representative group of Trump's base. And this wasn't just the hardcore militias. This was middle America. You had cops there, you had firemen there, you had military there. And how many, they don't really know, because the FBI, the Capitol Police, and the police for Washington, D.C., were not pulled out in the numbers that they should have been pulled out. And part of the reason is white supremacist groups have not been taken seriously by the FBI. They have put their focus on Islamic terrorism. When Timothy McVeigh blew up the federal building in Oklahoma, and when Obama was in office and tried to address the issue of white terrorism, the Republican Party came down on them and they backed off. In both cases, backed off of earmarking white terrorists, white supremacist groups as the primary threat. And that's in part because the system is wired to this white racism. The system is wired to terrorism. And you saw when you were watching the demonstration on January the 6th, you saw how carefully the outnumbered police were in treating the demonstrators. Yeah, they were outnumbered, but also some of them were letting them in to the Capitol. So, you saw sympathy on behalf of the people who were supposed to be out there to stop a raid on the Capitol. Whereas when Black Lives Matter movements held their demonstrations in DC, thousands of people were arrested. So I would say this, that this January the 6th, 2021 Capitol siege will go down, in particular the paramilitary right, as the most important demonstration they've carried out in this country, because they executed a symbolic attack on what they consider to be the enemy, which is the government of the United States and the police arm, the little that was there to defend against their presence. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the Turner Diaries and how the Turner Diaries have been a major influence on the new right wing. Well, you will note at the Capitol, there was a noose hanging with a scaffold up there, and that supposedly to hang Pence and possibly Pelosi. That comes direct out of the Turner Diaries. There's a chapter in the Turner Diaries where that happened. Just as Timothy McVeigh's attack on the federal building in Oklahoma came out of a chapter of the Turner Diaries. So the right wing was in there. They're trying to figure out how much coordination was there. It's very clear that this group was not armed in a way that they could have taken over the government. They didn't have enough weapons, but they had some weapons. They had baseball bats, they had some guns, and they had some people ready to arrest people. And from what was indicated, to also possibly kill them. What you also saw in this January 6th move was the convergence of both two wings of the right that I discussed 2 weeks ago. One is the mainstream, which represents think tanks, representatives and political parties, and the other, the insurrectionists, in this case, the militias or the vanguardists. What you had was a convergence of both, and in all likelihood, cooperation between the two. Investigations are going on now about whether or not congressional people, congressmen or women or their aides, actually escorted people who are on the hard right through the Capitol to give them a reconnaissance on things like hidden places where congressmen stay, how to get in and out certain passages that the public doesn't generally know about. And there are some Congress people that have said that they have witnessed this tour, which generally at a time of COVID-19 has been restricted. We'll see. We see that the Republican Party over 100 Republicans have supported the 150, to be exact, House Republicans have supported this position that the election was stolen. And none of them have shown a willingness, or very few, to condemn what has happened. So this motion is a motion that will continue on. And I think that you're going to see Trump directing it as best he can if he chooses to run again or chooses to oppose others who are running for office. So this is key. Now, the key point is this: Blacks leading a movement of brown, red, yellow, and a minority of whites won this election. So what are we going to get out of it? And this is the key thing. And that key thing is, what kind of pressure are we going to put on this administration? I think the first thing that we can acknowledge and see is that there's been pressure coming from various groups to see that they are sitting at the table and putting forward demands on behalf of Blacks, and other groups are doing the same thing. But here we're concerned about Black folks. So for a number of weeks, Black Lives Matter had been trying to get a meeting with Biden, and this was maybe a month ago, and had not been able to get one, but finally did. And according to their leaders, they have been sitting down and putting forward a series of demands on the Biden administration. One of the key figures that has played a role in putting pressure on Trump is a coalition coming out of the South led by Reverend William Barber. He's co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, and it's also called the Preparers of the Breach, or the Repairers of the Breach. And so they've had a series of meetings as well and have put forward demands. This is important. And in the case of Barber, he brought in over 30 people representing a coalition of Blacks. He's been engaged in what's called Moral Monday campaigns for a number of years, putting demands forward on behalf of Blacks and poor people in the South and around the country. So that some of the demands that Barber has put forward and are some ways, well, at least are being considered. One, support for the call for $15 an hour minimum wage, but unlike a lot of these calls, it's a call for an immediate implementation of $15 an hour minimum wage. If you add that up, that comes to about $30,000 a year. That's hardly eliminating poverty. Biden's made a commitment to that, but it really needs to be more. But this is a start, because you've got some people working at $7 an hour, and people who are working in restaurants and stuff working for less than that in tips, and with COVID-19, restaurants are shut down. So this issue of wage demands, I would suggest that there needs to be a serious discussion of a guaranteed annual income. And that guaranteed annual income should be an income that supplements whatever the income is of a poor person. And it should bring it up to $60,000 or $70,000 a year. And that would allow a person on the West or East Coast to live, especially if two people are drawing that kind of salary. And people in the Midwest could live quite well, and in the South on that income. The key to this, and this is a demand that Barber has put together, and this is a demand that Black Lives Matter already put together, is that the defense budget needs to be cut. Where's the money going to come from? One is tax the rich. The other is cut into the defense budget, which is over $700 billion. And the only communist country they have left is Cuba. Cuba doesn't have an air force. Cuba doesn't have a navy to speak of, and Cuba is not pursuing, never has pursued, at least under the Castro regime, any kind of war policies. And so this defense budget needs to be cut. Biden is pro-defense. If you notice, when he says, God bless America, he says, God bless the troops. I never heard anybody say that. And Biden's a neoliberal. He's someone that supports this idea of privatizing as much as possible, which leads to poverty. So this is going to have to be pressure put on this administration. Now, apparently Biden has announced his desire to put forward an infrastructure plan. This is probably the most important thing he could do economically, given where he's coming from. And it's possible that he might get some votes on the other side. I wouldn't count on it, but it's possible. But an infrastructure plan would have to be trillions of dollars, 3 or 4 trillion or more. And this would have to particularly guarantee that the jobs that are provided under infrastructure, which is repairing highways, all kinds of public buildings, bridges, you name it. I mean, this country's fallen apart. If you go to China, everything's new. I was there in 2011 on my wedding anniversary. Everything's new. Bullet trains taking you from one place to the other. This country is slow on everything. Everything's run down except the military. And of course, whatever the rich have. So cutting into the defense budget is key, as well as taxing the rich. So cutting into the Pentagon budget is really key. Putting money into Black communities, brown, red, and yellow, but we're concerned about Black communities for business development, economic development is crucial. Huge amounts. 40% of Black businesses have gone under with COVID-19. 40%. 90% of Black businesses are owned by a single person. And very few Black businesses received aid under the money that was used, the trillions put into COVID rescue. Very few Black businesses received any of that money. So it's going to take a special kind of fight to see that that happens. One of the things that's good about Biden's proposal is that he's talking about attacking institutional racism across every area of government, and then the policies that those government institutions carry out. And so if you're talking about the Department of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, then the policies that she implements, the whole Federal Reserve that Biden doesn't control, he only picks the head of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is used to rescue big business. They put trillions of dollars to keep the stock market up. Those trillions of dollars should go into the pockets of poor people. So tax on the rich should be a key demand. Another key demand under Biden's plan, because he's got a 1.9 million plan, part of which is to deal with COVID-19, has got to be a couple of $1 trillion that go to states to take care of their needs. Mitch McConnell has wanted no money to go to states because he wants to starve pension funds, because the whole move of big business is privatize everything. And he wants to starve state budgets, especially in blue states. And so he has held up on anything that would relieve poor people. I mean, he didn't want to give them $400. You know what I mean? So this is key. So overall, there's a need for continued pressure on the administration on demands that will meet the needs of the poor, and particularly of the Black poor. Barbara, and I'm sure Black Lives Matter, are pushing for a national health plan. It's obvious from COVID-19 that it wasn't just the stupidity of Trump and his racism that's killing people. It's a lack of a national health plan. And the fact that right now in the distribution of vaccines, you can't even do that because you don't have a national health plan through which you distribute it. So you're using pharmacies and everything else. And the rich are coming in and jumping in the front of the line. Whites are getting in front of blacks. You know what I mean? So this national health plan, which Biden has again been opposed to, it is going to require a real fight for that. Obama had the votes and didn't push it. He had 60 votes in the Senate. He had a majority in the House and didn't do it. So it'll take a real fight for that. Now, in terms of us, community empowerment, our action has to continue. Number one, we have to be able to protect our communities because you're going to see the rabid right moving. Since they've lost the election, there's going to be a lot more street action coming from them. And we're going to have to be able to protect our families and our communities. So we need to look at methods for defending our people. This is crucial. Whatever we do, we have to be able to defend it. And so this is very important. And show self-defense is not what I'm talking about. Parading around and showing your stuff. That's not it. It's what happens in Black communities to see that you're secure. We're also going to have to tackle Black on Black violence because it's really insane that in the midst of Black Lives Matter, in Chicago and places like that, you had a rise in Black on Black violence. And I'm not talking about all young Blacks. I'm talking about those engaged in the drug culture, the drug trade. That is going to have to be dealt with, and that's an internal thing that we have to be dealing with, and that requires program. We need in our communities to focus, one, anything we do, we've got to work on freeing the mind. Whatever we do, there has got to be a cultural renaissance, a return to the best principles of our culture, both ancient and current. That must be combined with economic, political, educational programs and social programs. The key thing that Black communities are facing now is that we've been hit since '68 by forces that have broken up families, extended families, taken jobs out of our communities, have led to the rise of a prison industrial complex. And so it's amazing that our youth could put forward a movement at this time when our community has undergone such hemorrhaging, such attack. And this isn't just the Black community in this country, it's the African world that has faced this same attack, particularly the continent of Africa through structural adjustment, where the programs that had benefited African nations, free schools, free hospitals, various programs that benefited the poor were wiped out in exchange for aid coming from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So the key thing about this crisis that hits the Black community right now is that the forces that have hit us economically, the forces that have hit us in terms of the police, the forces that have hit us in terms of the prison industrial complex have put our people in a position of choosing between two cultures. One European or Euro-American, the other African and African-American. So anything we do programmatically has to have culture tied to it. And I would argue one of the key things we have to do is, for the first time in our people's history, do an assessment of our culture. We need an African-American or New African cultural renaissance, where we begin to appraise this culture, look at its strengths, and look at how we can draw from it, and look at its weaknesses and how we can overcome it. The legacies of slavery that still exist, working on that. So these are key. The victory of Biden's important because it took Trump off our head. I never see electoral politics as the primary thing. The primary thing is what we do in our communities, among our people. and I pointed this out before, I think the format for organizing in any community where you have large, compact Black communities is block by block or pocket by pocket, wherever you have concentrations of Black people organized at the grassroots level in those areas. We need struggles to see. On the local level, I think Black Lives Matter is right. In Oakland, 60% of the budget of the city of Oakland goes to the police. These need to be cut. At the same time, um, putting that money into social programs. So, I think that Black Lives Matter demand on that is correct. And Obama and others who attack this are absolutely wrong, saying that they lost the House, at least lost seats in the House and did not get an upsurge of votes in the Senate because of that. No, I think you lost votes in the House and representatives in the House and didn't sweep the Senate because you played around on a lot of these issues. You took the Black vote for granted. Blacks organized in spite of you. You took the brown vote for granted. They organized in spite of you. But if you had really put forward a program, you could have taken the Senate. And if Biden's going to avoid a midterm loss that almost always occurs with incumbents where they lose the House, he has to go big on his budgets, on everything that addresses the issues of the poor. Had Obama done that, he probably would not have had a Tea Party to contend with, because he would have put enough hungry white people back to work, as well as Black, brown, red, and yellow. So that needs to be a part of our push. But in our communities, we need to be doing our own grassroots organizing. I have a leadership institute that I call the Amilcar Cabral Ella Baker Perronk House of Life Leadership Institute. I'm going to be doing some training from time to time with organizers, younger organizers, intergenerational training. But I think that this is extremely important. So this is important victory, but we know our communities are in bad shape. And we know right now with COVID, it's going to take a massive effort so that we can survive that and rebuild. So this is kind of like what I've had to say on our victory and what we need to do going forward. What we need to really recognize is that the right-wing forces are on the defensive. We're on the offensive. We better keep the offensive. The mad ones in the House and the Senate, who in the case of Mitch McConnell wants to stop everything except for what's good for the rich, and in the House of Representatives that wants to stand behind Trump, we have to keep outflanking them and out organizing them and build power and do your homework. And if you're going to lead, read. And I really suggest read my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, because it offers a lot of direction for a lot of issues that we're facing right now. And you can get that on Gumroad. So that's about all I have to, say. So I want to go to a few comments here. One is, how about the Biden bill? I've just referred to it. If anything, it needs to be strengthened. A key thing about this Biden bill, because it's a big rescue package for COVID, it's providing some money for everyday people. Right now, $1,400, which is supposed to be the supplement to the $600. And Biden's indicated that he might be willing to compromise on that. He shouldn't, because what's happened here is in Europe, people have received stipends every month. In Britain, when you're unemployed, they pay for your mortgage. All over Europe, people have been compensated during this economic and this pandemic crisis. But here, people have rent stacked up and they're not going to be able to pay it. Mortgages stacked up, no jobs, and for a long time going without any aid at all coming from the government. So this really means that there have to be major resources funneled back into people's pockets. But this infrastructure program is crucial because it can provide long-term jobs and rebuilding the country. And so you at the grassroots level, you need to be defining what you think some of those jobs are and putting pressure on the organizations in your community to pressure for them. So, I think that the Biden bill needs to go big. I also think that they need to quit worrying about working with the Republicans. And it sounds like they may be moving to try and push their bill through, whether they get Republican support or not, because the Republicans are going to do everything to kill what they're doing. Sister Robin Hughes says a special kind of fight for sure. Yeah, that's right, on every level. And hello to you too. So that seems to be the comments coming. So this wasn't just a celebration of a victory, but it was to look at what was the basis for the power. Don't underestimate your power. And it was to look at where's the other side coming from, not too much focus on that since we whipped them, but do not think they're asleep. They're going to be reorganizing. And to look at what can we do now. But I really say that we take a hat off to our people who, whatever level they were involved in this, contributed not only to saving this country from a madman, but helping humanity globally. But do not think that the administration you have in office is an administration that has an agenda that is just wired and geared for the welfare of the people. They are not. And a number of Biden's cabinet appointees are not that good. Blinken, who has been put in charge of the State Department, has expressed a desire or a willingness to continue policies against a number of countries that this country should not be going against. So we need to understand that just because Biden is responding or at least listening to what we're saying, that this administration is not necessarily all moving in the direction, or at least the appointees don't indicate that it may be moving in the direction that it should. So it's going to be a fight there, but mainly community revitalization. So I want to say thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Hotep.